Just one thing on the Parsha, and then we're going to go talk about Purim. Purim and the Megillah. So the Parsha this week is Parshas Tzav, 568 and 569.
Even Tzav walking it.
Yeah. So Tzav is really, for the most part, is a bit of a continuation from last week's Parsha of Vayikra. Last week we talked all about the sacrifices. This week we talk about the sacrifices and also the Kohen, what the Kohen does, how the Kohen dresses. And it begins with a very odd thing. It says, if we just read the first page, Hashem speaks to Moshe, 568 and 569. And it says that that the Kohen, now the Kohen is coming in the morning, right? So it says as follows: this is the law of the offering. It's the elevation offering that stays on the flame on the altar all night. So here, the night before, there was a sacrifice that was put on the altar burning all night, right? So now it's the morning. And the fire of the altar should be kept aflame. So all night, right, the fire is burning under it, and now we get to the morning. The Kohen now has to put on a special uniform, his fitted linen tunic, and he should put on his linen breeches, right, on his pants, right? And he shall separate the ash of what the fire consumed from the offering on the altar and place it next to the altar. He should then take off his clothes, put on other clothes, take the ash, bring it outside of the camp, outside of the temple, and outside of where the people are, to a pure place. And they keep the fire burning, that it shouldn't go out. Right? And the Kohen shall kindle wood upon it every morning. So what does the Kohen do? Imagine, the Kohen comes from home, right? And he goes from home, he comes to the temple, he has to put on a special uniform, a linen uniform, he washes his hands and feet, he goes up to the altar, he takes off all of the ashes, right, that are on the altar because it's been burning all night, right? He takes off his clothes, puts on different clothes, goes outside of the temple, outside of the camp where the Jewish people are staying. Right here it's the Mishkan, right? He goes outside, he puts it in a special place, and he comes back. So it's a very interesting law, because here you have this Kohen. He's dedicated to being in divine service. He lives, he works all day in the temple. He's constantly involved in seeing and miracles going on all the time. He sees all of these things happening. People come in, they need help, they want to offer a sacrifice. The entire Jewish people need to offer sacrifices. So here's what he's doing the whole day, right? Totally involved in spiritual matters the whole day. Right? You'd say that he's probably, not only probably a special person, he probably thinks he is a pretty special person, because this is what he does all day. You and I, we got to go to work, right? But as he does, he comes and he does all of this activity that he's doing all day, spiritual things. So he must be a special person. So here's the most amazing thing, is that what does the Kohen do? First thing, he gets up in the morning, puts on his special uniform, goes into the temple, prepares himself, and you know what he does? He takes out the garbage. That's what it tells us. He takes the ashes, cleans off the altar, and takes the garbage, takes the ashes outside of the temple, outside of the Mishkan, outside of where the Jews are staying, and that's where he leaves it. And then he comes back, right, and he goes about his business. So it's like when I tell this in the shul, I say it's sort of like, on Erev Yom Kippur. Imagine Erev Yom Kippur, right, it's a holy day, Yom Kippur, and Erev Yom Kippur, no matter how long it is, at least for me, it's never long enough. And you're rushing around, you get everything done, then you have this big meal, and after the meal, you light candles, and you make brachas on your children, and you go to shul for Kol Nidre. So of course, because of what I do, I have to be here right away. I have to be early. I can't be the last guy to come. So I have to rush down here and get here and make sure no one steals my parking spot, right, and be there. And so it's really holy. What am I doing all day? I'm thinking about my speeches. I'm speaking about everything working well in the shul, about all the Jewish people coming and getting forgiveness for what they've done, and a really unified feeling in the shul. Everyone feels very spiritual. I certainly feel very spiritual. I went through Rosh Hashanah. I did Slichas and Rosh Hashanah and the 10 days of Tshuva. Now here we are. Kol Nidre is about to begin. It's like a high time of the year for me, and I'm working through it, and right before I leave the house, my wife says, take out the garbage. And here I am, this holy person, dressed up in my new suit and my tie, about to go and deliver a speech in front of 1,000 people, and my wife says, before you go, take out the garbage. Right? It reminds me that I'm just like everybody else. Right? I might say, oh, I'm so holy and special and all of this, but I have I have to take out the garbage, just like everyone else does, right? In fact, it even says here, what does the Kohen do? He prepares himself. He puts on his shirt. It says he puts on his pants. It's sort of like an expression we have today. But the Kohen is such a special person, right? But the bottom line is he puts his pants on like everyone else, one leg at a time, just like we do. So the point is he's, the Kohen that is a regular person. So this is certainly not the purpose of this mitzvah, but there's no question that a part of the mitzvah is the Kohen who's involving himself in spirituality all the time has to remember he's just like everyone else. He's fortunate he was born as a Kohen. He's fortunate that he does what he does, but don't become arrogant. Don't think you're better than other people, right? First thing you got to do is remember you're like everyone else. So God says the first thing the Kohen does when he comes in, after he gets all dressed up in his nice clothes, got to take the garbage out, take off his nice clothes, take it out, come back, put his nice clothes back on, and do the work. So he should never forget that he's just like everybody else. Right? It's an important point that we find in the Parsha here, and that one should not overlook. So I just wanted to give you a thought on the Parsha before we go into the Megillah and Purim. So we'll turn to the Megillah, but really we'll speak first about Purim. The Megillah is on 1252, the Megillah of Esther. So let us talk about a few very important points. Let's try one. One of them is that there's a very funny piece of Gemara, or in the Talmud, and it asks a number of questions talking about the Megillah. It's in Gemara Megillah, and it asks the questions. It says, everything is in the Torah, right? We believe everything is in the Torah. If you know how to look, you'll find yourself in the Torah. You find everything in the Torah. So they said, if that's true, then Mordechai, where is he in the Torah? Because Mordechai lived a long time after the Torah was given, right? He lives already in the dispersion in Persia. The Torah was given when the Jews were coming out of Egypt. It's a big difference. So they say, so everything's in the Torah. Mordechai min Torah minalan. Where is Mordechai found in the Torah? It asks. So the answer is, it says mor deror. Because if you look in the story of creation, in the first chapter of the Bible, of the Torah, it says, right? No, excuse me. His is not there. And we talk about the spices here in the sections that we're dealing with when we were talking about all of the aspects of the Mishkan and later the temple. There are certain spices that were burnt. One of them is a spice called mor deror. It's a certain spice. That was one of the spices. Right? They'd have maybe cinnamon and this spice and that spice, put them together, and they would burn them to make a specific odor, like a fragrance. One of them was called mor deror. So a funny question, like, where is Mordechai in the Torah? And a funny answer, why? Because the word mor deror, right, it sounds like Mordechai. So he said, there he is, that's it. Okay, so then they say, okay, fine. Haman min Torah minayin. Where is Haman in the Torah? So the person answers back, well, you find it is back in the story of Bereshit, what I was referring to before. It talks about the tree, right? You're not supposed to eat from the tree. The tree of, right, the tree of knowledge, good and bad. So it says, hamin ha'etz, from the tree. Right? The Hebrew word hamin ha'etz, from the tree. Hamin ha'etz. Hamin is Haman. It says, that's Haman. Haman is in the Torah, where? Hamin ha'etz. Now, of course, it doesn't mean Haman, it means from the tree. So that's the answer the Gemara gives. So the guy says, okay, that's fine. So I'll give you another question. Esther min Torah minayin. Where is Esther in the Torah? Well, Queen Esther's got to be in there. So he says, sure. And it says in the book of Devarim, the last book of the Torah, we'll get to it like at the end of the summer, it says, Hester Esther Panai, I will hide my hidden face. God says that the time will come, and the Jewish people will act inappropriately. And you know what my punishment will be? Is I will hide from you. In other words, I'm not going to be so obvious. But not only will I hide from you, I will even hide the fact that I'm hiding from you. That is one thing, like, let's say if you have a parent, right, and you need you're a kid and you need your mother to help you, right? So if you see your mother, you feel secure. But let's say your mother's in the other room, you don't see her. So she's not here. She's here, but you don't see her. That's hidden, right? But but the fact that she's hidden is hidden, which means you don't know where she is, and you have no idea where she is, right? So therefore, then you get scared. Right? It's one thing if you see your mother and you're a kid, you feel good. If you know your mother's in the other room and you call out to her and she can answer to you, but you don't see her, so you don't feel so bad. But if you call out to your mother, you don't even know where she is, you don't even know where she's hidden, that's bad. So In the Torah it says that the Jews will act in such a way that I will hide my hidden face. I will not only hide from you, but you won't even know that I'm hiding. I'll hide even worse. So it says the word Hester, Esther Panai, is Esther. Esther in the Torah, right, is I will hide my face. So you say, right, it says one, then they have another one. There's another example. So it says Esther he Hadassah. The Megillah says Esther, she has two names. Her name is also Hadassah. And some commentators say that Esther was really a Persian name, even though it has a Hebrew meaning. And Hadassah was her Hebrew name. So what is Hadassah? So when they look in the Torah, Hadassah are part of the Lulav and Esrog. You have Hadassim. You have these branches that have a nice fragrance, right? They smell good, but you don't. But it has no taste, right? But they have a fragrance, and they're called Hadassim are myrtle branches in English. So it says Esther, she's Hadassah. Where is she in the Torah? Where it talks about this. So again, the Gemara seems to accept it. It sounds sort of absurd, right? Because certainly they lived after the Torah was given. So okay, you want to say you find them in the Torah. So where do you find them in the Torah? These are where you find them in the Torah. But what does it got to do with the story of Esther? Right? Mordechai is a spice. Haman comes from a tree, and Esther is a type of a branch. So what does it got to do with anything, right? So it is an important thing. If you look back in the story of creation, you see that Adam and Eve, they're in the Garden of Eden, right? And they have a wonderful life there. And they're supposed to live there, and they're supposed to be working in there, but you know, there's all kinds of miracles, and the whole purpose of the human being created there is in order to serve God. They don't have to work for a living, they don't have to do anything, they just have to serve God, and God gives them reward. So it's a perfect life. The only thing they're not supposed to do is eat from this one tree, right? So if you read in the words, you see that a snake arrives, and he sort of seduces Eve, Chava, into taking the fruit from the tree and giving it, and eventually she gives it to her husband. But if you look closely at the words, you'll see the words that she saw the fruit, it says. She heard the snake. It says that she tasted the food, right, the fruit that was from the tree. She touched it. We reached out and touched it. You actually see the words. She touches it, she tastes it, right? She hears the snake, and she talks, right? So human beings have five senses. You have touching, speaking, hearing, smelling, and speaking, right? Five, right? You can talk, you can hear, you can see, you can touch, and you can smell. Those are the five senses. 4 out of 5 senses, right, were a part of the story of how the Adam and Eve were thrown out of Garden of Eden because they sinned. 4 of them were involved. She saw, she heard, she tasted, right, and she touched. But the smell, it doesn't say that she smelled. There's nothing there about a fragrance at all. So now if we want to try to understand, it says if one of the ideas of what happens in the story of Purim is that they want to rectify some of the errors that people made in history. One of the errors that people made in history was the story in the Garden of Eden, that they were sent out from the Garden of Eden, and the whole world changed then. Right? Everything became different. And from that point on, things changed, and if we want to try to bring ourselves back on the spiritual level that we were then, we have to fix what we did wrong. However, since seeing and hearing and touching, right, and speaking were all used in the sin itself, they're corrupted. You can't use them in order to fix what happened. So when they ask you the question, where is Mordechai in the Torah, they tell you he's the spice. A spice is a fragrance, right? Purpose of these spices were for burning, for smell. So Mordechai we were reminded of Mordechai from the Torah because he is symbolic to a spice. And Esther is Hadassah. Hadassah are a type of a branch that has a smell, right? And Haman is the tree. What is the tree? The tree in the Garden of Eden, right? That you're not supposed to eat from. So it says that Mordechai and Esther, who are reminiscent of fragrance, smell is the only sense of the 5 senses that the human beings had. It's the only one that wasn't corrupted because it wasn't used. It never says she smelled the fruit. Or Adam smelled the fruit. Never. It says tasted and talked and saw and heard, but it doesn't say that she smelled. And therefore, the sense of smell is considered the most spiritual sense of all. Like, you can sometimes go somewhere and you'll smell a fragrance and it'll bring back memories that you don't even knew you had. Like sometimes you walk in and somebody walks by you and they're wearing a perfume or a powder, and you smell it and you don't even see the person, you just smell it and it reminds you of something from 50 years ago, right? Like that. You're transported immediately just by the fragrance, because a fragrance, a smell, was never a part of what was corrupted in the original sin of the Garden of Eden. So the smell is the highest spiritual level. Of course, also smell has no physical properties. You don't see something you smell, right? You can't see it, you can't hear it, you can just smell it. You know it was there. In fact, a long time after it's gone, you can still smell it. Or it's never even come in the first place. You could have a skunk outside your house at 2 o'clock in the morning, and when you go outside at 7 in the morning, you can smell it. It's nowhere around, but you can still smell it. Right? Because it has no physical properties. It's not there. You can't touch it. You can't move it. You can't see it, but it's there. And so therefore, fragrances are very, very important. So Mordecai and Esther, who are reminiscent of the fragrances, symbolic of the idea that fragrance, smell, was never corrupted in the original sin, are the tools that affect the tree, which is Haman, the tree that they ate from and they shouldn't have, the tree of good and evil, and it's their job to rectify that sin. And so by the end of the Purim story, that's what they do. So that's what that Gemara is telling us. The Gemara is hinting at the idea that Mordecai and Esther are symbolic of the fragrance, which was on the highest spiritual level. It could then attack the tree. Because the tree, if you go there and say, I'm going to say something about the tree will say, you talked, and you sinned because you talked about me. And you sinned because you tasted the fruit from me. And you sinned because you saw the fruit. But we didn't sin because of the smell. So the smell has that higher spiritual ability. That's why smell, a fragrance, is so powerful. It's so special. Sometimes if you talk to a real estate agent, the real estate agents will tell you they want you to stage your house. Right? That is, you make your house. What you want to do when somebody comes to look at your house, when you want to sell it, is you want them to see a home, not a house. You want them to walk in and feel like this is my home, even though it's not. It's your home. But you want them to feel that so that they will buy your house, because they're not looking for a house, they're looking for a home. Right? So if they tell you, set up your house in a certain way. But the most effective thing they tell you, at least the agents I've spoken to, is that one of the things you should do is you should either bake cookies right before people come, or you should take butter and put it in a pan and warm it on the fire right before they come, so that the smell of the butter, warm butter, people will smell it when they come in. What do you think of when you smell that? You think of home. Right? When you're a kid, your mother would cook. People would cook in the house, you smelled the butter. So you think of that. So when the people walk in to buy your house, they smell it. Why don't they say when you walk in, have a nice painting on the wall? Do that. Right? It's true. You want the house to look nice, but the fragrance is so powerful that they don't even realize that you are now changing their entire disposition of how they see your house. Yes?
Because fragrance is very high in spirituality, is that one of the reasons that we have the incense or to smell before Shabbos is over at Havdalah?
Well, that's one of them at the end of Shabbos that we smell in the Havdalah service, because it consoles us in that our spirituality changes after Shabbos. So our soul becomes consoled by the fragrance because it's so spiritual. Okay, so that whole concept, right, of what we're dealing with is that fragrance is an extremely powerful thing. It has. I tell people sometimes. One of the programs we do here is that we have one of our outreach programs is that we organize that if somebody has a funeral in our neighborhood and they're not affiliated, right? So I will often try to get that the funeral home will call me to be the rabbi. And then I'll go and I'll help them organize Shiva and organize their home, and I'll help, right? Because most rabbis, when you're hired by the funeral home, all they're hiring you to do is the funeral itself. So when the funeral's over, you're finished, you're done. But what we try to do is that I get to do the funeral, and then if they're in this area, we'll help them set up the Shiva house, and we'll bring people from the shul to their house to pray, and we'll try to organize things for them. The end result is, of course, they see what we're like, and they see that we're there for them, and it causes a connection. Right? So often when I'm talking to people, of course, most of them are not observant, and they'll start debating within themselves, how long should I sit Shiva? So some people, you're supposed to sit 7 days. So some people will say, I can't. I want to sit 3 days. I believe this way. I'll sit 2 days, 4 days. But I don't know where the basis is to do such a thing. But you're supposed to sit 7 days. So there's many reasons. So of course it's in the Torah. So you sit 7 days. But why? But what's so important? So besides the fact that God commands us to do this, there is an effect. When a person sits Shiva, and all of the rules that the rabbis developed that are tied into it, one of the things that happens is you very quickly go through a process of dealing with the death. The psychologists say that there are various stages to accepting when someone passes away. The rabbis understood this thousands of years ago, but today the psychologists say that first you have denial, like you don't really, on the inside of you don't really accept the person died. Like you'll do something like reach for the phone to call them because you're not thinking, right? Because inside of you, you don't feel they're dead. Like you don't pick up the phone to call like George Washington. You know he's dead, right? But when it comes sometimes, like my mother passed away like 20 years ago, sometimes I'll still like want to grab the phone to call her when something good happens. So because on some level, there's not a full understanding inside of me. So at first, we all do this. We have a total denial. After denial, it says that you have guilt. And this everyone does. I should have done this, I should have done that, I should have been a better son, a better daughter, I should have been at the hospital more, I shouldn't have listened to the doctor, all kinds of guilt, which is also a logical response, but it's not accurate. There's no reason to be guilty in most cases. After that, you have anger. You get angry at the dead person who died, you get angry at God, you get angry at the funeral home, at the doctors, everybody, because this person was here and they're gone now, so it makes you angry. Finally, the last step is acceptance. You finally accept and realize the person's not here, and you learn to live with it. That process is one of the most important parts of the Shiva, because you go through that in 7 days. So I tell people, if you don't do Shiva, look, I can tell you what you should do. I can't make you do it. That's up to you. You don't want to do it, you don't do it. But I will promise you something, that if you don't sit Shiva for this person, one day, in 6 months, a year, 10 years, you're going to go into the grocery store to go shopping, and somebody's going to walk by you, and you won't notice them, just like we said before, and they'll be wearing the same perfume as your mother, or the same aftershave as your father, or something like that, some fragrance, and you're going to smell it, and you're going to fall apart right there. Because you either mourn when it's right, or you're going to mourn when it's wrong. But you're going to mourn. It's going to happen. It's part of who we are. But I always use the example of a fragrance, because a fragrance is so strong, it causes so much to happen inside of you that you don't even realize it, how strong it is. Now someone can have a fragrance or an odor, and you can like them or dislike them just based on that, and not even know it. You don't even realize it. But if somebody, when you were a kid, had this sort of type of odor on them, and this person you meet now as an adult does, you won't like them, and you won't know why, because of that. So that's that's what I was talking about when I asked that question. Okay, that's one. But now, when we look at Megillah Esther itself, we find a number of things. The first thing that you find is that God's name is not mentioned anywhere in the book of Esther that we have here. You can read through the whole thing. If you want to, you can go ahead. But you will not find the name of God in it. And it's an odd thing, because you have all of these books. They're holy books. They're written by prophets. They're celebrating miracles. They're thanking God for what he did. So you think they'd put God in there. Right? His name's not in there anywhere. So the commentaries ask, why is it that you have this whole Megillah? The whole purpose of the Megillah is to tell you about what happened in Persia, and how the Jewish people were going to be killed, and God saved them miraculously. So why isn't God mentioned? So it's a very important point. When we read the Torah itself, the Torah is full of miracles. Very apparent, clear miracles. When the Red Sea split, it was such a miracle that the entire world heard about it. But it was enormous. When God killed the firstborn son of the Egyptians, that was a significant thing. That wasn't like a small thing, right? So that was, but nobody said it wasn't God. It just happened. It was a plague, and the plague only kills firstborn Egyptians. So it makes no sense. Everyone knew that it was God. It was an obvious, clear miracle, right? And up until that time in history, whenever there was a need for a miracle, they were obvious miracles. You could not say, I don't know, did God do it? Maybe it's science. Maybe it didn't happen through God. Maybe it happened this way. People would try to explain it. You couldn't explain it. It was too obvious. It was God. those were called what we call a nes nigla. It means a miracle that is revealed, where it's very clear, right? We don't have such miracles today. Now, when something happens to you, and you clearly see in your mind, right, that what just happened to you was a miracle. It's not normal. You know, a person driving a car and they get into a terrible car accident, and everyone around them is hurt, and you're fine, right? That's a miracle, right? You know it's a miracle, but you can't prove it, because someone will say, yeah, it just happened. You know, the car hit you at such an angle that every people got hurt, you didn't get hurt. Right? The plane crashed and everybody was in a certain spot where they got hurt. You happen to be in the one spot you didn't get hurt. God, they explain it away. But we know it's a miracle. It's just that God is hidden. He hides himself within the miracle so that it's not 100% sure. You will only see God's hand in the miracle if you look for it. If you don't look for it, you can come up with all kinds of answers why it's not God. So when was there a change between miracles that were clear and apparent and miracles that became hidden? The miracles we have today are hidden. God does miracles for us all the time, and people can still explain them away. Back then, in the days of the Torah, God made miracles for the Jewish people, and it was clear. There was no way of explaining it. It had to be God. So the change was at the story of Purim. Up until Purim, anytime God did a miracle for the Jewish people, it was clearly God. From the moment of Purim on, when God does miracles for us, you can explain them differently. You can explain them away. You shouldn't explain them away, but you can, because God is hidden. He doesn't do it. He doesn't like split the Red Sea. Say, I'm going to split the Red Sea in 43 seconds, and boom, he doesn't do that anymore. Now, he does it in a way you can say, well, it was the wind, it was this, it was that, it was nature, it was, you know, something else. That's how miracles are today. We know they're miracles, but they're called hidden miracles. Hidden, of course, is the word in Hebrew is Esther. It means hidden. And this book of Esther, Megillas Esther, Megillat, comes from the word Gilui, to reveal. It's revealing Esther. It is revealing the hidden. Right? It's on a different level. Of course, simply it means the book of Esther. But Megillah is to reveal, Esther is to hide. You are revealing the hidden. And from this point on, the purpose of this story in the Purim is that God is going to continue to do miracles for the Jewish people. He's going to save us, but you're not going to be able to see it. It's not going to be so clear. It's going to be hidden. We are going to right now reveal to you what's hidden. But from now on, you're going to have to find it yourself. So in the book of Esther, they reveal what's hidden. How do you know that it's talking about it? Because the book of Esther is full of miracles, but you never see the name of God anywhere. Why? Because the miracles are hidden, right? But you know you have Achashverosh comes to the decision that the Jews are never leaving to go back to Israel, so he makes a celebration, a big party for half a year. And everybody comes to the party, and he tells the Jews, don't worry, you can keep kosher at my party, you have the best hashgacha, you've got everything is fine, nothing to worry about. And they come and they celebrate, and there he has his waiters come out wearing the clothes of the Kohanim, and he wears the clothes of the high priest, of the Kohen Gadol, like we read about in this week's Parsha. And he's showing, don't worry Jews, it's finished, there's no more temple, we're not going back, I'm wearing this, right? And the Jews, they don't care. Like, you'd say, I get upset. This non-Jewish king, the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar, is walking around wearing the clothes of the high priest. Waiters are wearing the clothes of my Kohanim. I should protest. I should get upset. They didn't get upset because they also, like, we're getting depressed. We're thrown out of Israel. Maybe we aren't going back. The kings, we thought we were going back in 70 years. Well, it looks like 70 years came and went. We're not going back. Well, the king says so. So they go to the party because they think that's good for them to go to the party. They go to the party, and Achashverosh gets drunk. He decides he's going to show off. He wants his wife to dance in front of everybody, the queen. And she won't do it. And she's the queen. She doesn't dance in front of people. So she tells him, who are you? My father was Nebuchadnezzar. I'm the queen. You're only the king because you married me. You're just a stable boy, right? You're like from the wrong side of the tracks. You think you're a big shot? I'm going to get up and dance in front of these people because you want me to? Forget it. So what does he do? He kills her. He kills her. Now he's got to find a new queen. So who's the queen? Esther. She becomes the queen. Just coincidence happens, right? She happens to have an uncle. His name's Mordecai. He happens to be sitting at the gate, and he hears somebody who wants to kill the king, right? He tells the king. The king just happens to forget about it. Then along comes Haman. He wants to kill the Jews. As he's coming in to get the king to let him kill the Jews, where he bribes him, he bribes the king an enormous amount of money, let him kill the Jews. Suddenly the king remembers that Mordecai saved his life. He doesn't even know that this Mordecai is the same people that Haman's talking about, right? So he says, well, you know what? I need to honor Mordecai. He saved my life all those years ago. And along comes Haman to say, I want to kill this guy Mordecai. Right when the king realizes, oh no, this guy Mordecai is a friend of mine. So he says to Haman, listen, you know what? What should we do to honor somebody that I really care about? Somebody who's important to me. So Haman thinks, who could that be? It's me. He honors me. So he says, let him wear the crown, let him wear the king's clothes, put him on the king's horse, and make him go through the streets saying, here is the man the king wants to honor. So he says, okay, Haman, go out and get Mordecai and do it. Right? So just coincidence, right? So now it's going to kill all, right? So now he's really mad, right? Now he wants to kill all the Jews, right? And Esther has the ability to save them, right? So on and on and on, coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. It happens to be that Ahasuerus throws the party. It happens to be he kills his wife. It happens to be that Esther becomes the queen. It happens to be that Haman wants to kill the Jews. It happens to be that Mordecai saves the king. It happens to be the king remembers it when at the same moment that he wants to kill the Jews, right? On and on and on. Coincidence, 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 until you get to the end. And the end where the Jewish people are saved and they're able to stand up to Haman. Then Haman gets killed and his kids get killed and his house gets given to Mordecai, and suddenly the king makes Mordecai now the vice president. He takes over Haman's job. Esther is the queen, right? And everything's changed. Suddenly now, you look at it, the story, if you've heard the end, now you look back at the whole story, you say, wait a minute, this was all a miracle of God. Well, now that we look back, we use hindsight, we look into history, we can see God's hand in this. God did this. Right? But when it's happening, I don't see God. It just happens this way. It happens to be. He makes a party. It happens to be. His wife won't listen to him. It happens to be. He kills her. Right? It happens to be. Esther is the most beautiful woman, so she becomes the queen. But it just happens, happens, happens. Coincidence. So this message here is the revealing of the hidden. Is to tell you, from now on in history, when God saves the Jewish people, when God does something for you, any one of you Jewish people, you're not going to be able to say it was definitely God. There'll always be another way to explain it. It'll be hidden. But I want you to know with this story that it is God. And I'm hiding it on purpose. But you're going to know it's me. And you have to have faith that it's me, and you know that's the case. So therefore, you read the Megillah of Esther, and it's like dominoes. This happens because this happens because this happens, this happens. Big deal. It happens every day. You know, it's like, you know, God, you know, it's so sad what happened in Japan. Japan has these disasters, right? So people come and help them, and the people who don't come to help them, and then there's a disaster somewhere else, and different people come to help them, right? All coincidence, coincidence, coincidence. It just happens that way. It's just too bad for the Japanese. If they had been Korean, they wouldn't be attacked. They wouldn't have had this. It would happen in Japan. It was just coincidence. But nothing is a coincidence. There's no such thing. Everything comes from God. It's just God hides himself. He hides himself, right? So now that we know this, and we learned this in the story of Purim, so now we know that from now on, God will hide himself, but he will always be there for us. You won't see him. It's like, you know, when you learn to ride a bicycle when you're a kid. So at first what happens is your father goes out with you and he holds the back of the bicycle and you run with him and he's holding onto the bicycle, right? After a while you realize your father let go and he's way back there and you're riding the bicycle by yourself. As soon as you do, you fall off. Right? You go back, you do it again. This time you don't fall off. But you think, right, that's what God's doing. God's holding the bicycle. You just don't see him. He's there, he's helping you.
Heather,
you just don't see it.
come to my office. Heather,
and because you don't see it, you think he's not there. But he's there, and he's doing
Heather?
it. He's taking care of it. He's just behind you, holding on to it. Right? That's what the story is telling us, that from now on, that's how we're going to have miracles. Now, why is that? The question, why did it change? This is not so much about Purim, but the difference is that when it came to miracles, there has to be that people have free will. That is, I have to be able to choose to do what's right or not what's right. Either I'm going to do the right thing or the wrong thing, right? Any circumstance comes to me, right? Somebody comes to me and they say, you know, this person needs your help, but there's also a sale going on at the store and you can get your iPad that you want half price. So now I have a dilemma. Do I go buy the iPad or go help the person, right? What do? I have to have free choice. I have a choice, right? So it says that at one time in history, people's choice was such that they could see God and still choose not to do it. But today, where our level has gone down, to a point where if we would actually see God do a miracle, we'd be like an animal. We wouldn't be able to choose anymore. We would do whatever God wants because we're afraid. Because it's like right in front of our face. You do what I say or else, and you're walking with somebody, they go into a McDonald's, they eat a hamburger that's not kosher, and they die, right? And then you go across the street, the kosher restaurant, you buy a hamburger, right? You open the bag, there's $1 million in there, right? So that's a miracle, right? If that would happen, where two of you go, one person dies because they eat unkosher, the other one makes $1 million because they ate kosher, right? Would you ever think of eating unkosher? Would you ever stop eating kosher? Of course not. But you no longer have free will. You no longer have choice. No one's going to choose to die on purpose, right? No one's going to choose not to get $1 million. So therefore, you've lost your free will. That's what happens when God makes a miracle like that, right? So today, you can go and eat kosher and you won't get $1 million. You might even get sick. Right, but not hopefully not. But in other words, it has nothing to do with it. That God hides Himself. It's not clear, apparent anymore. Because if He was apparent, we couldn't live. We wouldn't function. And God wants us to have choice, to choose to do what's right, not to be forced to do what's right. He doesn't need us to force us. He wants us to choose it. So because the spiritual levels of people have gone down over history, now we're at a point where we can't handle a clear miracle. People say, all right, God, I'll believe in you. Just make this watch go up in the air 6 inches by itself right now. Go ahead. Right? Well, He's not going to do it, right? Because you know what happens if He did it, right? If all of you would actually believe me that it actually happened, we wouldn't have free will anymore. We'd say, oh my God, if I don't do what it says in the Torah, I'm going to die, right? It's terrible. What will happen to me? So God won't do those things because it takes away your choice, and you need to have choice. So the book of Esther is the point in history where that happens, where the Jewish people now have the ability to choose, because God is there for them, but they don't see it. And from then on, God is hidden in history, even today. And that's really how it is. So that's one of the main messages in the book of Esther. Yes, Julie?
Do we have any idea about which people wrote the Megillot? Or do you think it was a collection?
Who wrote it? It says right in the end of the Megillah. It tells you. I'll read it. See if I can find it. Who wrote the Megillah? So, it says here, so it says at the end, page 1261, it says, beginning in verse 29, V'tichtov Esther Hamalka bas Avichail, right? And Esther, the daughter of Avichail, right? And Mordecai the Jew wrote everything that happened in this letter of Purim, right? That's what it says. So Mordecai and Esther wrote the Megillah. They're the ones who wrote it, right, as we see it. And then they sent it out to the Jews. You can see if you read it, they sent it out to the Jews all over the world, because Ahasuerus was basically the king of the world, 127 countries. Right? He was basically the king of the world as they knew it, and they wanted it to become a holiday. So it says that the rabbis and the people then, the leaders pondered this, and they decided it's true. This was a hidden miracle. This should be a holiday, and they made a holiday. But it was Esther and Mordecai who wrote it down, who developed a lot of the ideas and the laws that we have, and they're the ones who told us what happened. So that's who wrote it. Okay, so we began with the idea that you don't see the hand of God anywhere, and you don't see the name of God anywhere on purpose at the end, until the end. At the end, you look back and you can tell. So why is that the case is that we had a couple weeks ago in the Parsha where Moshe asked God, God, let me see your ways. And God says, no man can see me and live. So there, the Torah tells us that Moshe goes and he based it on the Medrash. The Medrash says that Moshe has a dream, and he looks into the future and he sees Rabbi Akiva, and he says that Rabbi Akiva and the Torah class that Rabbi Akiva is giving. Now, of course, Moshe is the one who brought the Torah to the world, right? He knows the whole Torah, and now here we go ahead 1,000 years, and you have a student of Torah, Rabbi Akiva, a great rabbi, who has tens of thousands of students, and he's teaching his students Torah. And it says Moshe has his dream, and in the dream he sees Rabbi Akiva teaching his students Torah. And it says that Moshe sees himself in the class. He's way in the back, because he wasn't a good student. That's why, because the good students sat in the front. He was in the back. Right? It already makes you wonder, how could the guy who brought us the Torah and knows it all not be the best student? So it says that he hears Rabbi Akiva, and how Rabbi Akiva, what he does, right? How the Torah that he knows, how he's able to rediscover things. He knew laws that were told to Moshe on Sinai that we didn't even write down. He was able to come up with all of this through his logic and his understanding of Torah. So Moshe is greatly impressed by this amazing person. Then he has the dream continues, and he sees Rabbi Akiva being murdered by the Romans in a very painful, horrific death. Very, very painful, long, suffering, torturing death. And he looks to God and he says, God, I don't understand. This is an amazing man. Look what he did. How good he was. How righteous he was. How intelligent he was. How he did things for Torah. And you let him be murdered like that? What kind of a God are you? So he says, God, show me your ways. Explain to me. How is this possible? Right? Remember, it's a dream in his head, because it hasn't happened. It did happen, but not then. So he says, what? Show me your ways. God says, no, you're not going to understand. A human being can't understand what I do. Sometimes I do things, they're so elaborate, so discreet, and they're so subtle, you're not going to understand the reason behind it. But I'll tell you something. So he says like this. Moshe says, God, show me your ways. God says, no man can see me and live. So God says, but here's what you do. Go up on that mountain over there. In the mountain, there's a path to go up the mountain, right? You walk on the path. And on this spot in the path, there's a crevice in the mountain where you can sort of go into it, like a little cave, right? And what I'm going to do is you go into that cave, and I'm going to run by you, God says. But I'm going to go so fast, you're not going to see me. All you can see is me from behind. You look out, and you'll see me from behind, because I'm so fast, right? You won't be quick enough to see me from the front. You only see me from behind. That's what it says in the Torah. So we understand this, is that God's saying to Moshe, you can't understand me. Human beings can't understand the true depth of God. But I give you one thing that human beings can do. You can understand me with hindsight. You can look back and you'll see me in history. But when it's happening, you can't see me. That's too difficult. But in history, you can. So when we look back at the destruction of the temple, we know why the temple was destroyed. The first one, because of sins of illicit intimacies, about murder, about worshiping idols. The second one was destroyed because Jews were fighting with each other. We know the reason, right? Because those are thousands of years ago. Right? We can look back on history, and we can use hindsight to see. That's what Moshe meant. He tells them, you won't be able to see me, only from behind. The Gemara says you saw the knot of his tefillin, the back of his head. You saw the back of God's head. Right? This is a metaphor, of course. Right? It's not literal. You don't see God. So he saw the back of his head, meaning he has hindsight, so that we can look at things that happened in the past and we understand what God did. But when it's happening, we won't understand. So for instance, if somebody asks you why the Holocaust happened, I don't think we can give an answer. I don't know why. I know it was God. It was obviously God. It was too crazy to have been normal, right? But I don't know why. But I know why the temple was destroyed. So if we wait a certain amount of time, we'll probably know the reason for the Holocaust too, because we have hindsight. We can look back and understand it, right? Just like, it's one thing to be a quarterback in a football game. It's a whole other story is that after the game's over, that you'll tell the quarterback what he should have done. Right? You should have passed. You shouldn't have passed. You should have run. You should have done this. Should have done that. You lost because you didn't do this. Right? Everybody's a chacham after the game's over. Right? Why? Because they have hindsight. We have that ability, that hindsight to look back. That's what this is talking about. That from this point in history, especially, you will only see God with hindsight by looking back, because He's hidden. Yes.
He's saying now that we'll look back. Well, I don't even know about our generation, but generations after us will look back at what's happening in Japan.
Sure.
And understand.
Yeah, I mean it's a horrible thing to happen in Japan, but it is not so much more horrible than other enormous things, like the last time we had a tsunami, or when 3 Mile Island went up. Right? There are enormously horrible things that happen in the world, and we don't understand them.
My daughter told us because Jews didn't pray enough.
Well, what that means is that Jews have a responsibility for the world, and if we don't do what we're supposed to do, then there are problems. But we only know for sure after a long time to look back and see that exactly what it was that causes something. So this is what the book of Esther is telling us, that it's hidden. In fact, well, we'll close with an interesting law. I put together often a talk about Purim, and there are a few places in the entire code of Jewish law, what we call the Shulchan Aruch, which is the book of all Jewish law. There's only 3 places in the entire book that says that if you want to do something, if you do it backwards, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. I mean, I don't know why it has to tell you. It's logical, right? If I tell you you have to shake a lulav, so if you take your feet and shake a lulav, did you shake a lulav? It says you have to, you have certain ways of doing something. So if you do it backwards, like, why would you think it works? So it says if you read Shema backwards, it's not reading Shema. If you say Hallel backwards, you're not saying Hallel. And if you read Megillah of Esther backwards, you didn't read the Megillah of Esther. So you say, well, of course not. I mean, if I read the Torah backwards on Shabbos, did I fulfill Torah reading? Of course not. I'm reading gibberish. It's backwards. Right? Like the word, shalom would be molosh. Right? It means nothing. Right? So it says, no, that you don't understand. It doesn't mean that you read the words backwards. You read the chapters backwards. You read chapter 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, or you read the 3rd paragraph of the Shema, then the 2nd paragraph. It perfectly makes sense. You're reading it normally. You're just taking the paragraphs out of order. And that's telling you, no, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah. But why there and nowhere else? Is because those 3 mitzvot have a very special purpose that have to be done in a certain way. If you do it the wrong way, then you're missing the message. Like, for instance, Shema. Shema, the 1st paragraph of Shema tells us that you have to believe in one God. You accept upon yourself that there's one God. The 2nd paragraph is that God expects something from you. If there's a God in the world, He expects you to do certain things, His commandments. And the 3rd paragraph is doing a commandment. Remember going out of Egypt, talking about tzitzit. These are doing commandments. So why? Because, of course, if you believe in God, God expects you to do things, and then you do them. But if you don't believe in God, right, then you can't tell me that you believe you should do mitzvahs if there is no God. Who's telling you to do the mitzvah? Or if you're going to do a mitzvah and you don't believe in all the mitzvahs, then why are you doing it? Right? In other words, you have to do it in a certain order. Number 1 is I believe in God. Number 2, I believe God wants me to do certain things. And number 3, I'll do them. But if I first say I'll do them, but I don't know 1 or 2, I don't believe in God, then what am I doing? And why, right? It's out of order, and it makes no sense then. So that's logical, that Shema has to be said in order, because you're missing the message that first you believe in God, and now that you believe in God, you realize that God gave us the Torah, and you have to do the Torah. So now I'll do the Torah. But if I don't believe in God, or I don't believe God gave me the Torah, then of course doing the Torah is silly. But I have to do it in order. Same thing with Hallel. Same thing with reading the book of Esther. If you read the 10th chapter, then the 9th, the 8th, the 7th, back to the 1st, you're going to see the hand of God in the story of Esther from word 1, because you're reading it backwards. You already see, you read this last chapter, that Mordecai and Esther, they write a book, and Haman's kids get killed, and Haman gets killed, then God saves the Jews. And then 1 chapter before, you see that it's very tense, and Haman's about to kill the Jews. And 1 chapter before, Haman comes to tell the king he wants to kill the Jews. And 1 before, Mordecai comes and he saves the king. And 1 before, the king kills his wife. And 1 before, he finds Esther as a queen. Right, backwards, back. So it makes perfect sense. You see God. You see it very clearly. But they don't want you to see God. If you see God in the Megillah, then you're not missing the message. The message is God is hidden. He's not going to be obvious to us. And therefore you have to read the Megillah frontwards. If you read it backwards, then it doesn't work, because you're missing the whole message. And that's the point of what we're doing here. The idea is that God is with us wherever we are in the world. He's helping us. He takes care of us. He cares about us. But you're not going to see Him. If you look for Him, you'll see Him. If you look. But it's not obvious. And that's what the whole story of Purim and the book of Esther teaches us, that's going to be the case from now on. And that's how it's been. So you look for God, you will see God. But if you don't look for Him, you won't see Him. Yes?
When about was the time that it was written? Like how is it related to the Torah?
Oh, it was much later. This is like 1,000 years later, because this was in the days you had the Jews living. You have the entire book of the Torah, then you have the books of all the prophets, right? Now you get near the end of that, and you get to you have the destruction of the first temple. That happens with the Babylonians. Right? The Babylonian Empire took over the whole known world. Then that empire fell, out come the Persians, the next empire. They took over the whole known world, and they're the ones who the story of Purim happens with, right? Then when they fall, right, then you've got the Greeks and the Romans, right? And that's the story of Hanukkah comes, right? And then the destruction of the Second Temple comes, right? That's how it falls in. So here the Persians are the next step after the what do you call it? The Persians are the next step after the Babylonians, right, who destroyed the first temple. So that's where we are. So, you know, we've got lots going on for Purim here. You know, tomorrow is the fast of Esther, and then we have a Shabbos is called Parshas Zachor. We remember the destruction of Amalek. So we have a special Torah reading, and it's a mitzvah from the Torah to hear it. So even women come specifically to hear that. And then Saturday night begins Purim, and we have the Megillah. And here we're going to have 3 Megillah readings Saturday night. We're going to have 2 of them at 9 o'clock, right? One in the big shul, one in the smaller shul. The one in the big shul will be all the craziness and noise with all the kids and everything, and the other one will be less that way. It'll still have kids and some craziness, but it'll be faster for people who need to be somewhere. So that's that one. And then for people who can't come to the earlier one, because let's say they have little kids, they have to have, you know, somebody needs to stay with them. So the husband goes to the first one, the wife can go to the second one. So that's at 10:15. We have another reading, right, on Saturday night. And on Sunday we have one reading at 8 o'clock with our service, and then we have a second one also at 10:15 in the morning, so that the women or anybody else who didn't make it to the earlier one can come and hear that. So we have actually 5 times we're reading the Megillah here.